welcome to the stage best-selling author and peak performance expert, Stephen Kotler.
Hi. How's everybody? It's nice to see everybody. I can't see anything actually, but it's almost nice to see everybody. You're here? All right, we're gonna do something a little bit different today than I normally do. We're gonna talk about flow and creativity in the age of AI. And I thought I'd start here. So I know a lot of people here, so you guys may know something about my history, but if you don't, I started out as a reporter, and one of my beats was action sports. And I fell into human performance starting in action sports. And I covered action sports back in the 1990s. And if you know anything about action sports in the 1990s, it's often talked about as the era of impossible, where more impossible feats, things that were never been done before, and we thought were never gonna get done, got accomplished. And the level of innovation in these sports was off the charts, extreme. Nobody really knew where it was gonna go. Nobody even knew where it was gonna end up. And it caught my attention a lot. Not only because there were athletes breaking world record feats day in and day out, and I'll just give you one example. Surfing's a great example. It's a 1,000-year-old sport. And from 400 AD until 1996, the biggest wave anybody had ever surfed was 25 feet. And above that was considered completely impossible. There were physics papers written about how it was impossible for a surfer to paddle into a wave that was over 25 feet tall. There were other physiology papers written about how a surfer couldn't take the force of a wave over 30 feet tall in a fall. As you can see from this photo, surfers these days routinely pull into waves that are almost 100 feet tall. I think the paddle record is now at 115 feet. That's the kind of innovation we were seeing. So 1,000 years of no change, and then in a short 10-year period, the wave height went up 85 feet. And that wasn't just happening in surfing, it was happening in skiing and snowboarding and rock climbing, across the board in all action sports. And as a journalist, my first question was, what the hell is going on? Why is this happening? Where is it coming from? The other thing that really caught my attention, there are two other things. The first was, if you knew anything about peak performance back in the 1990s, this was the era of Anders Ericsson, the 10,000 hours to mastery that we've all heard about with Malcolm Gladwell. The subtext of those 10,000 hours is, to get those 10,000 hours of mastery, it was believed you better have the right parents because you need the right genetics. Your parents better have a lot of money because you have to afford the right coaches and the right training. And peak performance essentially in the 90s was believed to be a money sport and a genetic sport. And if you wanted to be at your best, those were the two advantages you needed. And yet everybody I knew, all of my friends, everybody in the action sports community, these were like hardcore punk rock communities. Everybody I knew was dirt poor. They didn't have happy childhoods, and none of them had good parents. Very few of them had mothers, right? Most of the people I knew had horrific childhoods. They had very little education and very little money. And in these communities, there was a lot of risk-taking. Obviously, they're action sports communities, and a lot of substance abuse. And normally, if you put those things together in a community, what happens is people die younger, they go to jail. What they don't do is reinvent what's possible for the human species. So that really caught my attention. What also caught my attention was something that was a lot subtler, was that these athletes, once you sort of get past the amazement and you actually get out there with them and know what they're doing, they were making better high-speed, high-stakes decisions than anybody had ever seen. They were making choices and exhibiting creativity and freedom in places where any mistake was fatal. And so it was the most extreme form of innovation I'd ever seen. And if you're interested in entrepreneurship at all, and you're interested in creativity, and you're interested in innovation, that's what caught my attention. I was like, holy crap, this is innovation under the most extreme conditions imaginable, and if something goes wrong, you're gonna die. That caught my attention. Now, the other question was, what the hell was going on? The answer, well, let me start here. What I saw in the athletes was something you could talk about as 360-degree creativity. So whatever happened on the playing field, wherever they were, big waves, big mountains, didn't really matter what direction they moved in, they had an answer. They had a creative decision, they had a problem-solving answer, they had a way out. And that really caught my attention because at the heart of resilience, is a trait known as adaptive flexibility. It is impossible to actually train resilience. You can't train yourself to be more resilient. You can train yourself to be adaptively flexible. Adaptive flexibility means that whatever happens, you can be creative under pressure and possibly come up with a solution. And it's the core of resilience. It's actually the core of grit. And it was what these athletes were displaying so much. So if you know my work, you know that the other thing that was at the heart of everything these athletes were doing was they had found a way to get into flow. So flow, for anybody who doesn't know the term, is technically defined as an optimal state of consciousness. It's a state of consciousness where we feel our best and we perform our best. In the zone, we've all had these experiences. It's those moments of rapt attention and total absorption, right? You get so focused on what you're doing, so focused on the task at hand. Hi, Anna. I can see you now. That everything else just disappears. Our sense of self gets really, really quiet. Our inner critic, the voice in our head, that nagging, always on, defeatist narrator gets really quiet. Our sense of time almost disappears, right? Past and future sort of vanish and we're put into kind of a perpetual now, what psychologists call the deep now. And throughout all aspects of performance, mental, physical, and emotional go through the roof. Let's talk a little bit about what I mean by through the roof. The first thing to know is that evolution hardwired all humans for peak performance. So all of us can get into flow. Everybody listening to me can get into flow, provided certain initial conditions are met. We're going to talk about what those conditions are as we go along. It's actually not even humans. Most mammals can get into flow, all social mammals, and possibly going all the way back to insects and birds. We now think swarming behavior in birds and fish when they school, we think that's a primordial flow state. We think that's what we're looking at there. But flow is ubiquitous in humans, so it shows up everywhere for us. I want to talk a little bit about the benefits of flow. So this is on the emotional side. These are 3 recent papers. You can't really read these. The first one is a paper by my lab where we're looking at the emotional benefits of flow. And we've known for a really long time, almost since the 70s, that flow underpins happiness, well-being, overall life satisfaction. By the 80s and 90s, we started to figure out that the people who scored off the charts for overall well-being were the people with the most flow in their lives. By the early 2000s, we had figured out that flow was so important to happiness that psychologists changed the definition of happiness. There are now 3 tiers of happiness. The lowest tier is happiness. It's the most obvious. It's how you feel right here, right now. And Dan Harris was sort of right. You can get about 10% happier, and that's about it. Meditation will get you there. A couple other things. Self-help can get you there. But anything above that is sort of locked out for a bunch of reasons that we're not going to go into today, but you can ask me later if you want. Above that is a next level of happiness known as enjoyment. This is a high flow lifestyle where the thing that is driving you into flow are your goals. Above that, the best we get to feel on the planet is purpose. It's a high flow lifestyle where the thing that is driving you into flow is aligned with a purpose that is greater than yourself, that will help the world. What we haven't been able to prove is the inverse. If flow is so good for our mental health, it should be useful against mental health problems as well. That's the work that's gotten done in the past 10 years. So first, my lab proved that flow overrides PTSD. So you can overrate PTSD with flow, which is why we do a lot of work with the military when they're coming out of the service. And we work with soldiers and things like that. My friend Karina's lab then found that flow overrides burnout. And this was a finding that happened during COVID when everybody was really, really burned out. And one of the questions they asked is, after COVID, who's flourishing, who's languishing, and why? What's the difference? And they found that the people who were flourishing post-COVID were the people who got into flow regularly during COVID. So we now know flow overrides burnout. And then another friend of mine's lab in Europe did an absolutely amazing thing with a 10,000 person twin study, which is sort of the gold standard of this kind of research. And they found that flow is neuroprotective against depression, Alzheimer's, anxiety, bipolar disorder, and cardiac-related stress conditions. So other than ADHD, I've literally just listed every major mental health problem on the planet. Flow appears to be the only protocol, the only tool. There's no other pill, there's no other substance, there's nothing else you can do that will treat all those conditions at once. This is what I mean when I say we're evolutionarily hardwired for peak performance. This is what comes built in. This is what evolution gave all of us. On the performance side, and I'm going to focus mostly on cognitive performance today because we're going to talk mostly about creativity. This is just a quick look. McKinsey, the business consulting, wanted to know how much more productive top executives were in flow than out of flow. So they went around the world. They spent about 10 years. It's a survey, so you always got to take that with a grain of salt. But on average, top executives reported being 500% more productive in flow. It means you go to work on Monday, spend Monday in a flow state, take Tuesday through Friday off, and you'll get as much done as your steady state peers. 2 days a week in flow, you're 1,000% more productive than the competition. My lab, folks at the University of Sydney, folks at Harvard, we were studying creativity in flow. We wanted to know how much above baseline creativity rises in flow. The numbers are all over the place. Average is 400 to 700% above baseline. That's a huge step function worth of difference. And it's not just one study that this shows up in, it's over and over and over again. And then folks at Harvard found that heightened creativity. Flow states are about 90 minutes long on average. That heightened creativity will outlast the flow state by a day, maybe 2. So you're 400 to 700% more creative, and it's lasting for a couple of days. So let's say you go skiing on Sunday and get into a flow state, go to work on Monday, that extra heightened creativity is going to stay with you. And then folks at Advanced Brain Monitoring, this is actually, you can find this talk online. There's a TED talk about it. It was done by a woman named Chris Burka. But they trained soldiers in flow, and they were training learning. And for a bunch of different reasons, learning spikes tremendously in flow. And they were doing target acquisition training skills, and they found that soldiers in flow will learn 490% faster than normal. So those 10,000 hours of mastery, which are kind of fake anyways, flow can cut them in half. That's essentially what the data tells us. So it's a huge step function change in performance. I want to talk about why this creativity matters so much in an age of AI. So human creativity comes in a couple different versions, right? We can be convergent thinking, which is essentially what AIs do, right? That's drilling down on one central thing, or we can be divergent. Divergent thinking, lateral thinking, outside the box thinking is what AI cannot do. Humans are awesome at it. We can connect really far-flung, disparate ideas together. And in flow, that's the property that spikes the most. Convergent thinking will get accelerated. Divergent thinking is really what gets fired up. So if you are interested in collaborating with AI, you want to be training up divergent thinking. This is what the machines can't do. And it doesn't seem like they're going to be able to do it anytime soon. I know there's a tremendous amount of AI hype right now about how smart they're getting. Have you guys worked with AI? Okay, they're not that smart. You've had that experience, right? We've all had that experience, like the hype isn't matching the reality at all. Yeah, there's a reason. We're in the middle of a hype cycle with AI. And it's really funny, I go to these AI conferences and I listen to people and I'm like, you guys sound like we sounded 4 years ago with NFTs or blockchain or Bitcoin. Remember those? Or the fucking metaverse. Do you know anybody who's ever been to the metaverse? As far as I could tell, it's Mark Zuckerberg's magic underwear. That's all we're talking about here. I don't think anything else is going on. So there's a lot of AI hype going on, but it doesn't change the fact that AI is coming, and we want to be able to collaborate with it as much as possible. And flow gives us the ultimate advantage because it pumps up lateral thinking. So this, I think, is a truism. Creatives who can drop into flow and collaborate with each other and with AI are going to own the next 10 years. So for everybody in here who's an entrepreneur, I want to repeat that. Creatives in flow who can collaborate with each other and with AI are going to own the future, at least the next 10 years. And we're going to talk about how we can use flow to amplify creativity to really get our chunk of that future. So this is another fact. This is the top idea is training flow is the only way to train adaptive flexibility. One of the things that AI is also going to do is create a tremendous amount of chaos in society. A lot of jobs, a lot of unemployment, a lot of technological unemployment in our near future. And adaptive flexibility, which is 360-degree creativity, which is the secret to resilience, is going to be the secret to thriving in an age of rapid change. So we've got flow underpinning adaptive creativity or adaptive flexibility and creativity, which may be the two key skills for thriving in an age of AI. So how do we train flow? Flow states have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow. You want more flow in your life? These triggers are your toolkit. Now, we're not going to spend a whole bunch of time on the science of why, but let me give you a quick shorthand. So flow follows focus. The state only shows up when all of our attention is in the right here, the right now, focused on the task at hand. That is what all these triggers do. So let's look at the individual triggers for a second. There's two varieties. There's group flow, which is a team or a group in a flow state, and there's individuals in a flow state. On the individual side, there's obvious things like complete concentration. Obviously, if flow follows focus, you need complete concentration. Curiosity, passion, and purpose. What happens when we're curious or passionate or on purpose? We pay a massive amount of attention to the thing we're doing. It drives focus. Underneath the hood, it's actually doing things like driving norepinephrine and dopamine and lowering cognitive load. But these are all things that the brain does to massively enhance focus. Autonomy works the same way. Autonomy and attention are actually coupled systems. So when we're driving the bus, we care a hell of a lot more where it's going. Very simple. Risk, novelty, complexity, unpredictability, all these things, when things are novel or high risk, what happens? It grabs hold of our attention and doesn't let go. So that's essentially how flow triggers work. The group triggers work the same. They just tend to grab group attention more. So we're going to go into more detail as we go along, but that was a high-level thing. All right, we're going to do a bunch of breakout activities. This is a very unusual Stephen Kotler workshop. I don't like training people. I have a lot of other people who do that for me, so I never run workshops, but I love Summit, so I thought I'd do it anyways. So we're going to, let's go row by row if we can. Because I want you guys to get into little groups and be able to talk a little bit. But we're going to spend the next 15 minutes, I think that's about right, next 15 minutes doing this. So the first thing I want you to do is take out something you can write with your phone, pad of paper, pencil, if you brought it. Identify what drives you into flow. So we've all been in flow states. We want to know what drives you in. Essentially, different people are hardwired for different flow triggers, and they change over the course of our lifetime, right? You could be really, really, really interested in risk in your 20s, and by the time you're 40s, that no longer works for you, and now novelty is a really good trigger. So in your 20s, you were an action sport athlete. In your 40s, maybe you travel a lot to get into flow because you get novelty that way. We all have these kind of core triggers. So what I want you to do is really think about what are your favorite activities that drive you into flow. And then when you think about those activities, see if you can list 3, 4, 5 different activities. What are the core characteristics of those activities? How safe are you? What's the risk level? Are you solo? Are you in a small group? Are you in a large group? Are you indoors? Are you outdoors? Is it quiet? Is it noisy? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You're just looking for individual kind of personal predilections that drive you into flow. So the next question I want you to answer is how can you import these flow triggers, essentially all of the conditions that showed up when you're getting into flow most, into your daily life. And then what I want you to do is just form small groups and talk about what you've discovered. This is co-training. People don't often realize how much we can learn from one another about getting into flow. This is my favorite part of this. Are you raising your hand because you have a question? Flow is an optimal state of consciousness where we perform our best and we feel our best. It's those moments of rapt attention and total absorption. You get so focused on what you're doing, everything else just fades away and disappears. To put it more technically, there are 6 core characteristics. When psychologists define flow, they say there's complete concentration on the task at hand. There's a merger of action and awareness. So the self, the action and the being become one. There's a loss of time, loss of our sense of time, loss of our sense of self. There's a feeling of control. If you look at somebody in flow from the outside, it looks like peak performance. You see Michael Jordan whirling in for a windmill dunk. On the inside, that's not what it feels like. It feels like, oh shit, I can control things I can't normally control. And then throughout, flow is ecstatically joyous. So the final thing is, how do you know you're in a flow state? It's ecstatic. It's really happy. Nobody's ever had a bad time in a flow state. It's unique in all altered states for that reason, right? You can have bad trips and good trips, et cetera, et cetera. Flow is the only state where you only can have positive experiences in flow. Does that help? Cool. Anybody else? When? So flow is a cycle. It's not an on or off switch. The brain tends to move to the alpha theta borderline in flow, but flow is an action state and it's a decision-making state. And every time we make a decision, decisions are a 6-stage cognitive cycle, and you will be kicked up into beta. So it doesn't, like, we say it's alpha theta borderline, but it doesn't hold. Like it changes a lot. Flow's a really dynamic state. When we really look at brainwaves, which is most of the work that my lab does, we look at the network level. So at the network level, instead of saying alpha theta, we say that the goal-directed system and the executive attention system are both hyperactive, and the default mode network is kind of slowed down. Does that help? Nope? All right, we can talk about it later. All right, let's give you 15 minutes. Why don't you spend about 5-7 minutes working by yourself and then get into small groups and talk about this? And then we'll come back and talk about it together. Cool? All right, how was that? Who learned some stuff about themselves that they didn't know? Anybody? What did you learn? Oh, that's interesting. Say more. Okay. Let me ask you guys a question. So one of the things that happens in flow is it's this huge neurochemical dump. You get norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin, and anandamine, sometimes oxytocin, and endorphins. It's the largest neurochemical dump you can essentially get. Orgasm and childbirth, you may get a little bit more, but those tend to be flow states as well. So one of the things you may have noticed in this exercise is if you think back to your life and you think about your positive memories, unless they're pegged to a date, like somebody's got married or a bat mitzvah or graduation or that sort of stuff, chances are you're remembering flow states because they get seared into memory. Those are the things we tend to remember in our lives. If you have positive memories, chances are you're remembering flow states. So we're going to drill down into 3 of the most basic flow triggers, and I'm just going to give you some parameters around them. So if you want more flow in your life, complete concentration, clear goals, and the challenge skills balance. This is usually where we start training people, and these are the triggers that seem to matter most. And I just thought I'd break them down for you, just so you understood how to work with them a little bit. So the first trigger is complete concentration. Flow follows focus. So we want all of our attention on the task at hand, and that raises a lot of questions. 1, for how long? What are we talking about? If I want to focus to get into flow, is there a certain amount of time? The answer is yes. 90 to 120 minutes is ideal. So if you can block off 90 to 120 minutes for your deep work tasks, the reason is, everybody knows this, you have a sleep cycle. It's 90 to 120 minutes long, right? We have a wake alert cycle. That's the opposite of the sleep cycle. So your brain has a built-in natural slot for paying attention for about 90 minutes. And I always say peak performance is nothing more or less than getting our biology to work for us rather than against us. So don't fight your biology. Give yourself that time if you can. When you're in that complete concentrated state, you want to focus on what you're doing, not on anything ego-wise. So not how it's going to make you look. So I'm a writer. When I'm writing, I want to be focused on the sentences, not on how my fans are going to like this sentence or is my editor going to like it or anything like that. What happens is once you start thinking about anything that can activate your ego will turn on a part of your brain, part of your prefrontal cortex that needs to stay off in flow. So when you focus on the task, that portion of the brain stays turned off, we can stay in flow. If you start thinking, oh, is this going to make me look cool, or is this going to get me a promotion, or any of those things, it's going to pull you right out of flow. This is really important. You want to practice distraction management, right? Manicure your environment before you go in. No cell phones, no email, no notifications. In fact, everybody should, before you leave this room, go into your phone and turn off every single notification. Don't ever let your phone steal your attention in that way. So distraction management ahead of time, right? We're not more powerful than our devices. We all know this, right? Smartphones were modeled after slot machines, the most addictive, distractive technology in the history of the world. That's what you're carrying around with you, so get rid of it. You want to batch your communications, right? These days, email comes in all day long, notifications come in all day. When I started doing the flow work, people dealt with like 1 to 2 communication channels. Maybe there was email, maybe you could get a phone call, maybe a text message. Now most executives I work with have 17 different things coming in at once. Batch your responses. I respond to email and all messages first thing in the morning, or early in the morning, and at the end of the day, and never in between. Limit incoming communication channels. When people want to give you an app or put you on Slack or any of those things, everything you can to say no. Batch communications and limit the amount of incoming communication channels. I said earlier that autonomy matters, right? Attention and autonomy are coupled systems. So if you have to do a task that you're not super fired up about, right? You don't feel like you have the autonomy you want. Maybe you've got a boss and they tell you to do something. You need to reframe that task and think about it in terms of a skill that aligns with your purpose or your passion. So, okay, I don't want to do all this, it sucks, but there's a little bit of it that's a sales component, and I need to get better at sales because it aligns with whatever, X, Y, and Z. You want to reframe the task so it aligns with who you are. Challenge matters. We're going to talk about why in half a second. And finally, the biggest distractions are our friends, our family, our coworkers, and our bosses. Have your conversations in advance. Flow is a massive spike in productivity. You actually get more time back for the people who want your attention. But if you can't get 90, 120 minutes of uninterrupted concentration, this isn't going to work at all. So you got to have your conversations in advance. All right, so that's a little bit on complete concentration. And next little exercise. So list your top 5 distractions. What steps should you take to eliminate them? When should you take those steps? I don't mean like, oh, I need to eliminate distractions from my life, I'm going to start now. I mean like before you start your workout session, when in your day. And then, once again, a little bit of cross-training, share your solutions. We're going to do this one for 10 minutes because it's a short one, but the same protocol. Does that make sense? Any questions? Awesome. Go. All right. I want to spend a little bit of time on this idea since it's a room full of entrepreneurs. Flow follows focus. We've identified sort of your primary flow activity and what triggers might be active there. We walked you through kind of the top 3 triggers for training flow. It seems like a lot of people that I'm training these days, especially who are creatives, are having creative pathfinding problems. What do I do next? How do I find my mission? How do I figure out what my next set of goals are? And there's actually goal-setting architecture. So goals drive focus. Obviously, they're very important for flow. So I just thought I'd briefly cover the goal-setting architecture before we break down clear goals, which are another flow trigger. So we're goal-directed machines. Humans are goal-directed machines. And humans function best with 3 levels of goals. So you want mission-level goals on top of your life. You can have a couple of these, 2 or 3 as a general rule. I want to make the world a better place for animals, would be a mission-level goal. I want to be a great author is a mission-level goal. High hard goals is the next level down. These are the big mega steps you need to get to your mission-level goal. So if my mission-level goal is I want to be the greatest author in the history of the universe, which is actually one of my mission-level goals, not a real thing, but I'm still going for the title. High hard goal would be, I want to get a degree in journalism. I want to get a job on a magazine. I want to write a book on cooking. I want to write a book on fitness, et cetera, et cetera. Those are high hard goals. High hard goals are usually like the 3 to 5 year action plans we need to sort of reach our mission. High hard goals get shrunk down until daily clear goals. This is essentially a daily to-do list. We call them clear goals for reasons that I'll get to in half a second. But if you are struggling with mission level goals, we're not going to cover this today. I just want to tell you where to get the information. If you search my name and the passion recipe, you will get a bunch of different articles. The passion recipe is a recipe for figuring out what your mission is. It's a very simple formula for doing it. If you want it in written form, it's in the opening of my book, The Art of Impossible. So you can find it in written form there. You can actually get it for free all over the internet. If you're trying to figure out how do you chunk high hard goals into daily action plans, like I want to write a book on cooking as my high hard goal, I always tell people, list 100 steps it's going to take to reach that goal. Everything you can possibly think about. So if I'm going to write a book, I know I'm going to have to write every day. That's one of the things that would go on it, but I know I'm going to have to market the book. So I'd have a marketing line. I know I'd have to hire a publicist. Anything you can see goes onto that list. And I say 100 because it's usually a pretty good number. It really makes you stop and think. Don't go crazy with it. Do like 20 steps a day that you try to break out and come back the next day and come back the next day. And when you're out of ideas, show that list to friends of yours, similar fields or nearby fields, and say, am I missing anything? The reason for this is twofold. One, everything, basically, especially in business and entrepreneurship and mostly in life, there are a couple things that don't fall in this category, but most everything is a checklist. And if you figure out what's on the checklist, you can get it done. So most people just don't take the time to break all these things down. The other thing that's really important is oftentimes if you're not thinking about things and you're in your high hard goals, like I've seen people put things like book marketing on a list. Book marketing is a year-long, 2-year-long process. You have to have teams. You have to have publicists, you have to have a lot of stuff. So there's nothing worse to getting to the next item on your checklist and realizing, oh shit, it's 6 months worth of work and I should have started 6 months ago and where's my frickin' team and et cetera, et cetera. That's really demotivating, shatters focus and will block flow. So get as much visibility as you can. And then clear goals, these are our daily action plans. So I want to talk a little bit about what we mean by clear goals. Flow follows focus. When goals are clear, we know what to focus on now and we know what to focus on next. It massively lowers cognitive load. Cognitive load is all the crap you're trying to think about at any one time. And if I lower cognitive load, what happens is I liberate a bunch of energy in your brain, which your brain will immediately repurpose for paying attention to the task at hand. So clear goals produce a tremendous amount of dopamine, which is a focusing chemical. So if you're trying to create clear goals, it's basically a daily to-do list, but there's a very specific way to do it. So the first thing I tell people to do is for the next 2 weeks, if you want to run a clear goal experiment, count how many things you can do in a day and still be excellent at all of them. So anything that is going to take energy goes on a clear goals list. So this is not just work tasks. If you have to have a difficult conversation with your brother or a complicated conversation with your spouse, right? That goes on the list. If you want to go to the gym because it's going to burn energy, that goes on the list. If you have to walk your dog, that goes on the list. Anything that's going to take energy, because we wake up with a limited amount of energy. Willpower declines over time. We don't exactly know why. We used to, my prime minister got in a lot of trouble for linking it to glucose levels. That's not actually true. We don't actually know what willpower is linked to yet, but we do know it declines over the course of a day. So the first thing you want to do is figure out how many things you can be excellent at in a day. And if it's 9, you run the experiment for 2 weeks, count, right? You don't ever want more things on a to-do list than you can be excellent at. Why would you want to set yourself up to do mediocre work? So the first thing you want to figure out is how many things can I be great at in a day? Second thing you want to do is you want to devote that 90-minute to 120-minute block of uninterrupted concentration or high flow deep work time to the hardest task. That's where you start. Always, because you can start with your hardest task and it's done 90 minutes later. Especially if you're doing it first thing in the morning, you've won your day before your day has even begun. And that, again, produces a tremendous amount of dopamine and it makes it easier to do all the other stuff on your checklist. Then, when you're trying to put together the clear goals list, it's descending order of energy. Most energy first, second, third, all the way down, right? The really easy phone calls, that's what's at the bottom of your list at the end of your day. And this is something that we've been doing a lot in work I've been doing, working with creative leaders. So one of the worst times for most everybody in this room is pretty good when they're on task. Most of us can probably produce a light grade flow state for ourselves when we're on task doing our thing. Where we get fucked up is switching between tasks. That's where we get really screwed up, right? One of the things we do really wrong is we do stuff that gets, like we might be in flow on task A, but we'll do things that will activate our prefrontal cortex, get the ego involved. Like we go check social media, right? Did I get a like? Did somebody insult me? That's gonna turn on the prefrontal cortex, it's gonna totally kick you out of flow, it's gonna fuck up your day. In between tasks, we have people microdosing with creativity. Do a little drawing exercise, do a little writing exercise. I love little drawing exercises for this. I'm a really big fan of it. You will be shocked by how much your day improves if you're doing little micro creative tasks. Like you need a break, do something creative for 5 to 10 minutes. One, that creativity is going to produce more flow, probably going to produce more dopamine, so it's going to prime you to get back into flow on your next task. It will also massively improve the quality of your mood. You'd be shocked, but give it a go. Try it for a little while. I think you're going to really like it. All right, so I want to talk about the last flow trigger that we want to talk about, which is the challenge skills balance. So this is often called the golden rule of flow, the most important flow trigger. We talked about complete concentration, right? And we talked about our clear goals list. How do we attack the items on the clear goals list? That's where the challenge skills balance comes into play. So here's the idea. Flow follows focus. We pay the most attention to the task at hand when the challenge of the task slightly exceeds our skill set. So you want to stretch, but not snap. If I were to put this emotionally, I would say that flow sits in the midpoint, what's known as the flow channel, between boredom, there's no stimulation here, I could give a fuck, I don't care, I'm not paying any attention, and anxiety, whoa, way too much stimulation, right? I can't stop paying attention. In between is a sweet spot. It's known as the flow channel. For anybody who speaks physiology, this is the Yerkes-Dodson curve, one of the oldest findings in physiology, but psychologists talk about it as the flow channel. To put a number on it, Csikszentmihalyi, who's the godfather of flow psychology, sat down with a Google mathematician about 10 years ago, 15 years ago when he was still alive. They tried to figure out what's the difference between challenge and skills? Can we put a number on it? The number they came up with was about 4%, 5% difference. And we took that into a lab and beat on it for 10 years. It's a really hard thing to test. So I think it's the most accurate metaphor in science, but I can't tell you this is a fact. But as a general rule, you want to maximize the amount of flow in your life. When the challenge of the task at hand is about 4 to 5% greater than your skills, that will maximize flow. What's 4 to 5% in emotional language, so we can identify that? Just outside your comfort zone. So if you're doing something you're not great at, or you're a little shy or meek or timid, that kind of thing, a little risk adverse, you're going to be uncomfortable. So you want to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You're not going to be massively overwhelmed, but you're going to be a little uncomfortable. For hard charging types, type A types, for entrepreneurs, a lot of people in this room, the problem with that 4 to 5% chunk is we take on tasks that are 30, 40, 50% greater than our skills because it wakes us up and just grabs our attention. That's great, that's fine. Those big tasks are fantastic for motivation, but you want to chunk it down so the thing that's right in front of you that you're doing right here, right now, is about 4 to 5% greater than your skill set. So that's the first thing to know. The second thing to know is 4 to 5% is a very tight window. And we live in a society where most of us are dealing with levels of anxiety almost all the time, right? The modern world has a tendency to make us hyper-vigilant for a lot of reasons that I'm not going to go into. But if you wanted to get into flow, you really have to manicure your nervous system on a daily basis. So this means 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night, pretty much a mandatory if you want to be regularly getting into flow. There's no real way around that one. It means a daily meditation practice, daily mindfulness practice is really useful. Usually what I tell people with nervous system management is, if you got 5 minutes, do a gratitude practice. If you got 10 minutes, do a mindfulness exercise. If you got 15 to 20 minutes, do something creative. If you've got 20 minutes, 25 minutes, go for a walk in nature. If you have more than 25 minutes, go to the gym and get a workout in. Those are the very best ways to manage your energy. And by the way, if you have between 5 and 10 minutes, read a novel, fiction. Reading 6 minutes of reading fiction will calm your nervous system more, by the way, than 15 minutes of mindfulness meditation, which they don't like to tell you in the mindfulness movement, but reading fiction is actually better than mindfulness for managing your nervous system. Pardon me? No, the only thing that we found is you just need something with a story that'll pull you in, and you don't usually, for reasons nobody can quite figure out, sort of like cheap romances and really fast thrillers don't seem to work. You need your brain to be sort of plugged in a little bit. It can't just be candy. It's got to have a little bit of substance, but it doesn't have to have a ton of substance. Thank you. I'll be here all week. Time luxury really matters, right? Time stress is a horrible stress on all of us, and it really shuts down the nervous system. So if you can, I like to have my deep work session. This is me. I'm an extreme lark, which means I get up really early, so I'm not telling you to do this. I'm just telling you what I do. But I will get up I start my writing day at 3:30 in the morning, and I'll work from like 3:30 to 8 a.m. every day, because nobody's around. Nobody bugs me. It's non-time. And with writing, there's a lot of days I wake up and I'm like, holy fuck, I got to spend an hour on this sentence. And if it's 10 a.m. and every day my staff is calling me, I can't spend an hour on a sentence. And that's how much focus I need. So time luxury really matters. We talked about stacking motivation for tuning the challenge skills balance. So you have your mission level goals, you have your high hard goals, and you have your clear goals. You want them all pointed in the same direction, right? So everything you're doing all day long is actually advancing your mission. This is really great for holding attention. And finally, here's an interesting tidbit. So one of the things that happens in flow is it's a delicious place to be. And we will ride that state to the bitter end. It feels really good. So once we get into flow and the ideas are flowing, right, you don't want to pull yourself out of flow, and you'll follow that, stay in it as long as you possibly can. And it's a bad decision. And the reason it's a bad decision is flow is a really high energy state. It is very expensive for the body to produce. There's a recovery period on the back end of a flow state. So after you're in a flow state, you really need to recover afterwards, actually, to get back into flow again. But if you ride that flow high to the bitter end, you've just stolen too much neurochemistry from yourself. So anybody who's ever done MDMA knows a couple days later, you can be a little suicidal, depressed, right? I know nobody in this room knows what I'm talking about. By the way, you can pay me in drugs. Come on, it was a cheap shot in this room. All right, so peak exits matter. So in other words, quit working on the project you're doing when you're most excited. So this was an old writing trick. Hemingway used to talk about it. He used to he'd get to his most excited, he would literally walk away mid-sentence. And if you look at Hemingway's journals, some of his paragraphs are broken off mid-sentence. I learned this trick from the Latin American writer Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who's passed away now, but same thing, peak exits. So the reason is when you're in flow, your ability, yourself is turned off. So by the time you sort of notice, you're like, oh wow, these ideas are flying. By the time you're actually noticing, you're starting to move out of the flow state. You can break it then. And you'll keep some dopamine in reserves. This is a great thing with writing, because otherwise you wake up the next morning, you have to face a blank page, and nothing is worse than a blank page. But if you stopped at the point you were most excited, when you go back to work, your body gets really excited again. You're like, oh, look, I'm really excited about where I was, and you just keep going. So if you can break a task when you're most excited, that's fantastic. All right. So we're going to take one more sort of deviant break, which is we've talked a lot about how to get into flow, and I talked about the advantage flow gives us with AI. I want to talk a little bit about AI and cognition, and I'm sorry this is not bigger. AI is a phenomenal tool, but if you use it wrong, it's going to make you stupid. And I'm going to talk about how that works and why that works. So these are my 7 commandments for AI. This is like every day on my team has to live by these. And the first thing you want to do is thou shalt not outsource thy soul. Use AI to enhance, not replace your creative process. If it writes for you, it thinks for you. So your brain is first and foremost an efficiency engine. The brain requires 20% of our energy at rest. So when we're doing something difficult, it takes way more of our energy. And the brain always wants to conserve energy. It's the first thing it wants to do. So it will look for advantages to outsource. Does anybody in this room remember phone numbers? No, because your phone does it, right? There's something called the Google effect. We no longer remember facts if we think we can look them up. It's the Google effect. So when AI is thinking for you and you're outsourcing actual cognition or creativity to your AI, and that you're letting it do all the hard work, what do you think is going to happen in your brain? Very, very, very quickly. Your brain loves efficiency. So it will literally make you stupid in 1 to 2 sessions. And that part of your brain will stay shut off provided you keep working with AI this way. So it will actually make us all dumber. We need to be able to get into flow and collaborate with each other in AI. If we're dumber, we're not going to win that war. Thou shalt suffer for flow. So the struggle for creation is actually a signal. When we're struggling, you get a little bit of norepinephrine. It helps prime the brain for flow. It also primes learning. If you're letting the AI do all the work and it's making it too easy, you're not going to learn. You're going to stop learning. So not only you're going to outsource cognition and creativity, you're now outsourcing learning to a machine. So flow requires challenge. AI should elevate your edge, not erase it. If it's too easy, you're not learning. 3, this is a writing thing, but thou shalt keep sacred the first draft. So my point is, if you're going to use AI for a project, always try to do the work first and use AI to correct it. You don't want to outsource the first draft to the AI for a bunch of different reasons. One, and this is really obvious with writing, it's less obvious with other things, though I've seen the same thing as a scientist using AI. If you let AI do the thinking in the beginning, it's going to create the sort of the track that you think in. And what happens is when it does the original thinking and comes up with the first draft, all your ideas, all your associative memories, everything that you could actually bring to this thing is shut down because it started someplace different. It didn't start where you would naturally start. It started where it wanted to start, and you don't have all that information. So you've locked yourself out of your own database. You've now basically wiped your memory out of the equation. So we've lost learning, memory, cognition, and creativity. And we're only at number 4. Thou shalt preserve the joy of creation. If AI removes the satisfaction of making something, you've automated too much. Let me ask you guys a question. Remember when social media showed up and we loved it for like the first 2 weeks? Felt really great. You're connected to all these people. We felt really safe and secure. And like 2 weeks in, you got that bad feeling that said, God, I'm a little lonely. And I don't feel so connected. And this feels hollow. Remember that bad feeling? Right? And we all ignored it at the time. That was the largest mental health crisis in the history of the world, starting right then and there. And we all got the signal and we all ignored it. How many of you have worked with AI for 3 or 4 hours and you come away feeling hollow and empty, like you've just sort of binge watched shitty television? Who's had this experience? Anybody? Bunch of people? Okay. If you haven't yet, you will. You're outsourcing the joy of creativity to your AI, and that negative, that bad feeling, that is literally your cognition and your creativity leaving your brain. So we didn't pay attention to the social media signal, and we ended up with the largest mental health crisis in the history of the world. We're getting the same signal from AI, and if we don't pay attention to it now, that's where we're headed. Thou shalt honor serendipity. This is so important. AIs are prediction engines. They're predictive coding. It converges in on the same idea. It obliterates serendipity and chaos and chance. Serendipity and chaos and chance these are the ingredients to creativity. The brain needs novelty as the seed kernel for creativity. Creativity is a recombinatory skill in the brain. It's what happens when the brain takes in new information, links it up with older ideas, and the result is something startlingly new. If you've removed all the novelty from the equation, you've removed your ability to find the seed kernel of creativity. And finally, thou shalt remain the master, not the servant. AI is a choice. We can choose to unplug it. Keep parts of your life untouched by algorithms so your thoughts remain your own. I think this one is self-explanatory. And with that, we're going to say thank you for listening and take 10 minutes worth of questions or 7 minutes worth of questions. Thank you. I don't trust you over there, Mike, but I'll call on anybody else. Okay, what do you want?
So what are you doing with Flow Alliance? What's that about?
Thank you, Mike. So if you know my work, you know that the Flow Research Collective was a giant research and training organization, and a year ago we shut down our training division. And mostly we shut it down because I've got the largest data set on human performance anybody's ever amassed, and we haven't had the time to analyze it. So some of the reason we shut down our trainings was that. Some of the other reasons is I really wanted to work with creatives. I had spent 10 years working with knowledge workers, and I've never worked in an office. I don't that's not my world. I'm a creative weirdo, and I wanted to work with creatives, and I really wanted to work with creative leaders. So I started what's known as the Flow Alliance, which is a very intimate 15 to 20 person mastermind that I've been running a couple times a year for really high level creative leaders who are really interested in sort of doing this work intimately together with a small group. So if you're interested and want to apply to that, that's Flow Alliance. And if you're looking for more general flow training, the only thing I'm doing this year is Flow for Writers, which is my big writing workshop, which is fantastic and a blast. And that's, I think, coming up in October. And you can also go to stephenkotler.com and apply for that. Thank you, Mike. Please, Alex.
How did you come up with the flow rules?
Which flow rules for AI?
The last ones. Yeah, the commandments.
So this is going to sound odd, but 5 years ago, we do a lot of work with AI, right? And for example, my chief science officer, Dr. Michael Menino, until 3 weeks ago, ran the largest graduate AI program in America. So we work with AI as researchers and scientists. It was machine learning, right? But building simulations and things for a long time. And as it started coming up as a creative, obviously I was there early, and we started researching it and trying to figure out how to. So a lot of the work wasn't. I taught you the high level rules. A lot of our work has been on interface design, and a lot of our work is. So we believe, because the next education system is going to be an AI tutor for kids, right? And if you don't build an AI tutor for kids with a flow layer built in, you're going to have all the problems I just talked about, right? So that was where it started. My real concern was actually and if you know me, it was worker retraining. I'm a blue collar guy. I come from Cleveland, right? And in about 7 years, all the truckers in America are going to be out of a job because they're autonomous trucks. It's the largest blue-collar workforce in America. And it turns out when a lot of blue-collar people are unemployed, bad things happen. So we started thinking 5-6 years ago, how the fuck do you reskill people really, really quickly with AI and those sorts of things? That was where all that sort of research started. Good. I think I have time for a couple more.
What's your recommendation for when there's resistance to that?
Yourself or others?
How about others?
Resistance is futile. Either or. So let me start with self, because I think everybody makes this really complicated. The question I get a lot is I've got a daily to-do list. How do I keep everything on the to-do list? I live by a couple of rules, 2 of them in particular, for accountability. These are my accountability rules. One is I work for the boss. What does that mean? The boss is the version of myself who writes the clear goals list. Usually I do it the night before, the day before, right? Because the day of, I am like everybody else. I'm a hedonist. I want the easy out. I don't want to do the hard work. But I work for the boss. The boss is the guy who has my long-term best interests at heart, and he's the person who creates the clear goals list. So I don't think of it as an option, right? One of the easiest things, if you want to stay married, take divorce off the table. I take the idea of not doing a clear goal off the table because it's not like I'm working for the boss. 2, and this is the most important thing I can tell you today, if you're working with clear goals lists or daily to-do lists, if you put an item on your list, you're essentially making a promise to yourself that I'm going to do this thing today. So the minute you don't do that thing, you've broken a promise to yourself, and your brain will notice. Your brain notices when you quit, and your brain is an energy efficiency engine. So what do you think happens when your brain starts to notice that you don't finish your goals? It says, oh, look, she's not going to finish her goals. I'm not even going to bother giving her the energy. She needs to go after the goals because it's a waste of energy. And I'd rather conserve the energy because there might be a survival crisis around the next corner. So I work for the boss. The boss is who makes the clear goals list. And I know that once it goes on the list, if I actually don't do it, there's massive cognitive consequences. And nobody pays attention to those cognitive consequences, but you're actually training yourself to quit. And you're probably training yourself to quit when times get hard, which is even worse. So that's how I think about those.
Thank you. Sort of levels of flow. You have low-level flow and high-level flow. So the high-level flow, at least in my experience, often comes with risk. So you're a skier yourself as well. And I wonder, what are your tips on finding high-level flow where in the same time reducing the risk? Can we find that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We can close with this question. So, and this is actually a lot of the work we do with like spec ops, Navy SEALs coming off deployment, and professional athletes coming, like ending their career. We do a lot of work with people who used to be in really high flow, risk-based careers, and how do you replace it? So creativity itself is a flow trigger. So it's actually pattern recognition. When you link two ideas together in a novel way, you get a little squirt of dopamine. You can stack creativity on top of creativity, and if you do it 2 or 3 ways, or 2 or 3 times in a row, you'll actually get as much dopamine as you get from taking a risk. So and by the way, even when I work with athletes, we train athletes, you never want to use risk as a flow trigger. That doesn't make any sense. You'll go to the hospital. I've broken 88 bones. At least 50 of them have come because I'm like, oh, I'll just jump off this thing and I'll be in flow and the day's gonna be great. No, idiot, you're going to the fucking hospital again. So what we do is like when I'm working with athletes, we creatively interpret the terrain features. We don't go hit huge hits. We like, oh, there's a little bump there. Oh, I can throw a 180 off of it and just interpret stuff creatively. You can do the same thing outside of flow. One of the reasons I told you to microdose with creativity between tasks is it sort of mimics it. All right, that is my time. Thank you, guys.